we're going to go ahead and get started. This is Mr. E, the bearded music teacher. So today we're going to talk about how radio transitioned to TV. And then we are going to talk about Tin Pan Alley, just a little bit about Tin Pan Alley and why that's important. We're not going to dive, we might get a chance to dive into all this. But anyways, so this is episode 2 of, I guess you could say, the school year remixed. So if you guys have been following my channel, former students of mine or listeners that have been in my podcast channel, this is a redoing, I guess you could say, of all the topics that I discussed last school year. And so last podcast we talked about the beginning of radio, and now we're going to talk about the transition to TV. Now, don't think that radio just disappeared. It didn't. It actually has a resurgence later on, which we'll talk about, particularly first wave of rock and Beatles mania. They really start to go by radio there. But let's talk about how radio switched over to TV. We have these things called televisions that are invented, and it's seen as the driving force behind everything. It's the new thing, and everyone's going to it. And as a result, radio was starting to see a downturn in their audience. So what they literally took the popular hits of the radio. So things like soap operas, adventure stories, comedy shows, variety shows, things of that nature, along with news, they just transplanted it into TV. Now, that brought about a whole new thing with studio time and acting and screenwriting and things like that. That was really great, because then we started having this thing with movies kind of crop up and everything. But the TV stations, the three big ones that really transitioned, that were really big hits, were Guiding Light, which was in 1937. Then we also have The Lone Ranger and Superman. Now, due to copyright, you see that there is some, if you're watching the video of this, you see that there are 2 videos there on the slide deck. However, due to copyright, I feel that it would not be a good idea to show these or even have the audio of these because of copyright issues. So if you want to experience those, my suggestion would be to go to YouTube, type in like The Lone Ranger and put 1930 after it, or Superman 1930s or 1940s or 1950s. That you'll see that that's the way to go about it. And there's some things where you can find full episodes even of The Lone Ranger and Superman. So if we have some older listeners in the audience that are not a part of my actual class, you might get a blast from the past and go, "Whoa, I remember that." I don't, because I was not around during that time. I'm still fairly young. So in the 1940s, though, audiences left radio. Radio really in the 1940s suddenly just dropped off. And again, that became with the invention of the TV, as well as a guy by the name of David Sarnoff. So RCA starts doing the drive to do to TV. And now David Sarnoff actually started in radio. He decoded radio transmissions from the Titanic in 1912. And that led to his start in RCA, and he rose up in the building of the NBC network. And all the radio shows that I mentioned, Guiding Light, Lone Ranger, and Superman, all transitioned to TV by the 1940s. And that left a huge gap in radio, as radio broadcasters were like, oh no, what do I do? Because what they had was they had all their big guys jump ship and go over to TV. So if you think about maybe having, I don't know, I used to be a big pro wrestling fan, and when back in the early '90s and mid '90s, we had WCW and WWE, which was WWF at the time. When WCW closed down and was, I believe it was bought out by WWE. I'm not quite sure, but anyways, it ended. Some of those superstars from that roster of people in that company jumped over to WWE. We also saw this when WWE bought Extreme Championship Wrestling, or ECW. You had the big guys like Sandman, Tommy Dreamer. They had a short time in the WWE as actual wrestlers because their talent, they could still wrestle, and so they jumped over to that. Same thing with radio. So, Tin Pan Alley. What is Tin Pan Alley? Because Tin Pan Alley was something that really supported both radio and TV. It was the publishing currency that was in pop music. About 100 years ago, songwriters and song producers had clustered in one area to form a geographic heart of the music and entertainment industry. And I use entertainment meaning the idea of like screenplays or musicals where there'd be actual music involved in the movies, not serious movies where there would be no music. And it got the name Tin Pan Alley from the sound of rows of pianos lined up, all plunking out ideas on the pianos that they had. And the reason why we had those is it became more of like a think tank, if you will, where you had all these different people lined up in all these different pianos, and they would be playing out parts, and that really developed things. One of which came out of there, as you can see on if you're watching this as a video, Irving Berlin, Cole Porter, also Jerome Curran, and George Gershwin. George Gershwin, everyone knows, is Rhapsody in Blue. All right. Irving Berlin is actually known for Alexander's Ragtime Band, as I have listed there. But you also have a ton of musicals done by Irving Berlin, or at least musical numbers. If we ever get a chance to do a separate series on Irving Berlin, his life is pretty fascinating. He came over, if I'm not mistaken, he came over as an immigrant, a Jewish immigrant, and they changed his name to Irving Berlin. That's not his true birth name, but it's the true American dream story, where this guy came in to America, very, very meager upbringing, modest, humble upbringing, and ends up being like the top name in music for the time. I mean, it's a true marvel to hear and see what he did. So, like I said, it was the basic currency, the music. Tin Pan Alley, you can think of it as the U.S. Mint publishing the currency of music. And so, with that came a cookie cutter way of doing things. And you'll see that there's a sectional verse chorus form. And that's how they kind of were able to make money quickly. So these songwriters, nowadays we have, let's just say Bob Dylan. Bob Dylan's a singer-songwriter. That will pop up later on. But let's say Bob Dylan is a songwriter. Back then, in the Tin Pan Alley days, you would have Bob Dylan just in Tin Pan Alley writing songs. He would write the songs, and then he would publish them, and those would be performed based on the artist that would want to do it. So it wasn't the actual songwriter that was important. It was the different versions that would be popping up by artist A, artist B, artist C, and so on that would be famous. And a good example of that in early rock would be Bing Crosby, Frank Sinatra, and even in the first wave of rock with Elvis Presley. Elvis Presley got his big start and even built an entire career on doing everyone else's songs. To the best of my knowledge, right off without any notes in front of me, Elvis did not write any original songs. So if you can think about that, there's a lot of songs that he did that were not by him, but they were performed by him. But anyways, how they made money was creating this sectional verse chorus form that ties directly into what we have with rock music and also pop music. So the sectional verse chorus form is where you would have what we call in music A, B, A. So the verse and the chorus is considered A together, okay? So the A section is verse and chorus tied together. Then you would have the A section again, verse, chorus. Then the B section would be a bridge or a solo or a bridge and solo or just a solo. But it'd be something different. So we would have a different contrasting style of how to do things. And if we had time to talk about songwriting, there's a formula for doing that that is evident in a lot of songs when we talk about harmonic structures. But the song ends with a reprise or a repeat of the A section where there'd be a verse and then a chorus or a chorus. And we look at that with the Beatles. When they wrote their early hits, we'll talk about this in great detail, that the Beatles took the sectional verse chorus form and exploited it to make millions. They're still making money, even though two of the members have passed away. They're still making a lot of money on these simple songs based on the sectional verse chorus form. So as we start to see all this music come up, Broadway in New York goes, wait, we can use them for our musicals. And they tie in right there. And a good example of Broadway meeting the sectional verse chorus form is Somewhere Over the Rainbow by Wizard of Oz. All of my students either have heard it or have heard of the musical or movie, The Wizard of Oz. George Clooney, there's a recording of George Clooney's mother, Rosemary Clooney, singing this, and it's absolutely gorgeous. But I don't, obviously, I can't show it on this podcast for copyright issues. I don't want to infringe on the rights of my artist that I love so dearly. But the songwriters composed the song, then it would be transmitted to the audience. The songwriters rarely performed, and they knew that they could make a lot of money on Broadway. Then Broadway turns to film, and you can see this if you look at Pippin, Les Miserables, just recently, within the past, I'd say 20 years, musical to film. You have things like Sweeney Todd. They had a musical that turned into a movie also recently. But Sweeney Todd's been around for a while. You have things like Oklahoma. I actually own a copy of, I believe it's Oklahoma, with the actor who played Wolverine in the X-Men series. So Broadway turns to film and they make even more money because Broadway was big in New York as the way of getting the most recent form of entertainment. The big thing was going to Broadway in New York and seeing the best performers of the time. So now, how does this have anything to do with rock? Because when we think of rock, we think of an electric guitar, distortion, drums. Well, we are setting the stage for it. We are setting the stage for the sectional verse chorus to come out. We are setting the stage for the pop culture that would come out of this, and that rock really takes a hold of in the mid-1950s. That is where we need to be thinking and focused on of that. Because out of Tin Pan Alley comes that sectional verse chorus form. That's the big one. And again, I alluded to the Beatles. The Rolling Stones do it, but that has some blues flair to it, things like that. So we're going to end this podcast episode right there because the next time that we come together for a podcast episode, we're going to talk about how the singers come through. We're going to talk about the big band era, then the development of the singers, and then we get to see, not only now do we have the piece of the songwriting, but then we get to see where the band, the actual rock band, starts in rock music. That is it. As always, check me out on Twitter, and I'll keep you posted on everything else. Thank you for watching, and thank you for listening to this podcast.